President Trump has made a series of other comments on his Truth Social platform on Saturday. He says the United States has, quote, blown Iran off the map, and the military operation is weeks ahead of schedule. He says Iran's leadership is gone, their Navy and Air Force is dead, and they have absolutely no defence. He's also reiterated that Iran wants to make a deal, but adds, I don't. He said over the past 2 weeks the war will soon be over, but there's no sign the US president is about to call a halt to hostilities. In a moment, we'll bring on our guest, Sena Azodi. But first, let's remind you about what President Trump had to say about this war just a little earlier on Saturday.
Oh, I think we've won. We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force. We've knocked out their anti-aircraft. We've knocked out everything. We're roaming free. From a military standpoint, all they're doing is clogging up the strait. But from a military standpoint, they're finished.
All right, let's go to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, who joins us now. Alan, what do we make of those comments and what else President Trump has been, comments that he's making over the past few hours?
Well, the threat to Iran and targeting their power infrastructure is clearly an escalation from Donald Trump. For so long, he said this is not a war against the Iranian people. But many will feel that by targeting civilian infrastructure like this, is exactly that. Here's another thing that the White House needs to consider. By targeting civilian infrastructure like that, I've been texting someone in the last hour or so, they say this is effectively a war crime. You cannot do that. It's something that is forbidden. And Donald Trump has quite openly said that within 48 hours, if access to the Strait of Hormuz is not given by Iran, if they put up any obstacles, then he will target their power infrastructure, starting with their biggest power plant first. Now, Donald Trump has been talking since March the 9th about how the war is almost over. Here we are on the 21st, 3 weeks into the war. And it's clear that what almost through with the war actually means. He has talked about how he's destroyed the Air Force, which is true, how that most of the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the sea, which is true, how they have aerial superiority over Iran, which is true. But of course, he's also said they have no more targets left to hit, yet they continue to hit targets in Iran. There will be concern in the Middle East about Donald Trump taking this sort of action, because the Iranians have been planning for a war with the United States for more than 30 years, and so have contingencies in place. But it feels as if Donald Trump is very anxious politically in the United States about the Strait of Hormuz being closed and the impact that's having on the cost of oil and the impact that's having on the US economy. From a president who said that people would feel better, would be richer, would be more successful, this has been a huge stumbling point. And this also is reflected in the polls. Although 100% of Republicans in a recent poll said they support everything that Donald Trump does, the average American voter is concerned about the war in Iran and where it is heading.
Chief US correspondent Alan Fisher joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you. I'm joined now by Sena Azodi, the Director of Middle East Studies Program at George Washington University. Sena, thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, this is all a developing story as we go on with watching what Donald Trump has to say, particularly as developing comments over this weekend. We just heard Alan Fisher there refer to an escalation. How concerned are you that these comments will directly relate to an escalation of what we see in terms of US attacks on Iran?
Well, very much so, because if the president actually goes ahead with targeting the power plants, I don't think Iranians will sit and watch. They will most likely going to target regional countries, energy infrastructure, power plants in the region, and then the U.S. side might want to escalate on its own side. And then I think we're already in the vicious cycle of escalation, but I think it's going to get worse for everybody in the region and for the Americans who were promised by the president that he's not going to stop wars. He called the previous interventions as big, fat mistakes. And now he's already stuck in a war that he started.
You talk about a vicious cycle of escalation, and I wonder to what end? Because if this is another attack that prompts another retaliation, and yet we see another few days of the same things we have already seen, What changes with this ramp up in the sort of attacks that the likes of US and Israel are making on Iran?
I believe that right now we unfortunately don't have any off-ramps left. Unless something big
That's a very
happens.
dangerous position to be in, is it not?
Yes, very much so. And I think each side thinks that they don't have much room to maneuver. They don't want to seem weak. They don't want to seem that or signal to the other side that they're backing down. And I think they are becoming the prisoners of their own decisions. This is a time that I think that the political leaders no longer control the war. It is war and the events that are actually controlling the political leadership in the US, in Iran, and Israel.
You know, there is that concept of groupthink that once everybody is in that mindset, there is very little room to manoeuvre, as you say, about getting out of it. And when we look at the words Alan was using there, escalation, and that we look at the targeting of civilian infrastructure. Will that targeting of civilian infrastructure prompt Iran to retaliate in different ways or in stronger terms than we have already seen so far?
I think the Iranian civilian infrastructure has already been targeted. In the first week of the war, we saw the Israeli attacks on Iran's Tehran's oil depot, which created these apocalyptic scenes from Tehran with smoke all over the city. The day after that, there was no sunlight in Tehran. That was how bad the situation was. So that line, I believe, has already been crossed. I think that the President Trump, to his credit, tried to stop that, but I think he's initiating his own attacks on Iran's civilian infrastructure, which is going to directly affect the Iranians who are now just entered the new year yesterday.
Is there an off-ramp for Iran? If there is no off-ramp for America, is there one for Iran here?
I think what Iranians demand is not just a ceasefire. They want a longer political settlement, because from their perspective, a ceasefire would only allow the Americans and the Israelis to regroup, replenish the interceptors in the region, and come back, if not 6 months, a year from now, they're going to attack. And this time, Iran will have a lower hand or less cards to play with because of the impact of the attacks on their military and defense infrastructure.
Can we talk more broadly? And I realise you are an expert in the Iranian subject matter here, but there were rallies today through Washington, D.C. for some Iranian diaspora. We know that there is an enormous population of Iranians who live now in America, but yet there is a complicated arrangement of feelings as to how people feel about their homeland, about its leadership, and about the role that either party plays in the war here. How much does that public sentiment play into politicians from either side deciding where to go to next with this conflict?
I think in Iran, people are now, at least those who thought that U.S. intervention would bring in democracy, have faced the reality that bombs do not distinguish between, pro-regime and anti-regime people. The nature of war, the way it works is that when bombs starts falling, people take shelters. People do not come to the streets because their survival instinct kicks in and they just want to survive. They want food, they want shelter. Thousands of Iranians have already been displaced out of their homes, and this was just ahead of their new year, which, as I said, started yesterday. And I think in the Iranian diaspora, there are those who think, and again, that foreign interventions will bring democracy and freedom, but lessons of history prove otherwise. Bombs are not conducive to democracy and freedom.
This is perhaps a very deep question to be asking you as my final question to you, Senator, but you are an expert on Iran's nuclear program. You have a book coming out on this subject matter in just a couple of weeks. So when we look at the way that Israel has been conducting its role in this conflict, how concerned are you that nuclear facilities will end up being directly targeted to an extent that would cause some kind of fallout to the wider region?
I shudder to imagine. The effects of direct attacks on nuclear facilities, dissemination of radioactive material, is going to hurt everybody in the region. All the GCC countries are going to get affected if, for example, the Bushehr nuclear reactor in the southern part of Iran is directly attacked. By the way, we had 2 projectiles that recently landed around the Bushehr reactor, and it's extremely dangerous. It applies to the Iranian side too.
It does, right? It's vice versa.
Right.
The same could happen from Iran to other places as well.
And I think the attacks that the Iranians did near Dimona, I think it was a direct political message signaling from Iranians that if you attack our nuclear facilities, we can also target your nuclear facilities. And for a small country like Israel, it is extremely dangerous that radioactive material are disseminated.
Mr. Azadi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming in. Sina Azadi, Director of Middle East Studies Program at George Washington University. All right, let's go to Manuel Rapallo, who joins us live now. Manny, you've been reporting from the State Department. What is the chatter from DC foreign policy circles on these latest developments?
The conversation inside here in Washington among those foreign policy circles is quite divided. More than anything, I would say at the moment it's quite urgent. One thing that we should note is that President Trump does still have a lot of support. And within his support group, there are many who argue that this military action by President Trump is finally achieving the deterrence that for so long the hawks of Washington have been calling for here. But even among that group, there is this growing rift, this growing divide that we've seen among those who believe that there is no clear end game here. And it's that uncertainty that's fueling another conversation, a much louder conversation that's not only taking place here in Washington, but across the country. And it's whether or not the United States is being pulled in to a wider conflict, a regional war that stretches from the Persian Gulf to Lebanon and beyond. So there's concern right now. We're talking about these foreign policy circles. There's a lot of chatter talking about the economic impact right now, the risk of a global shock, the continued disruption of supply chain, the continued disruption of energy shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. There's concern over the fallout between the United States and its closest allies. We know that President Trump's been trying to galvanize this international coalition of countries, NATO allies. I would say the conventional wisdom here, but really it's President Trump's argument is that it's other countries, not the United States, that rely heavily on Gulf oil, far more heavily than the United States does. And because of this, these countries need to do more. They need to step up militarily to help share in the burden of securing the Strait of Hormuz. So there's the fallout that we're witnessing in real time as President Trump continues to sort of berate its closest allies in Europe. There's also, again, the conversations being had over whether or not there's going to be an off-ramp. I mean, over the course of the day, I've been reporting and listening to, I mean, maybe foolishly optimistic that there could be a diplomatic off-ramp, maybe even an economic off-ramp at this point to see an end to this conflict. We heard from President Trump on Friday, who said that he wanted the war to start winding down. But then the conversation within that same breath, the president is saying that there's going to be more troops. Within the same framing of the Trump administration, we're hearing from Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, calling for $200 billion in war funding. So how can that be? How can these two things exist at the same time? And I think right now what we're seeing is a very strategic message from the president. On the one hand, he is saying to the American people that this war has already been won, militarily at least, but to the rest of the world saying that he wants this war to come to an end, but he cannot show any weakness. The United States has to project that strength and power in the region, and they're going to continue to do that for as long as it takes.
Manny, thank you very much. Manny Rapallo joining us from our newsroom in Washington, D.C. We're joined now by Paulo von Schirach. He's the president at the Global Policy Institute. Paulo, thank you very much for coming in this evening. We just heard Manny there refer to this dual messaging from the president, predicting this message at home that the war has been won, there is nothing to worry about, all in control, but on a global level it's very clearly not over. What do you make of the most recent developments then about this 48-hour deadline and the likes?
Well, it's hard to say. And with President Trump, we know that he has a way of changing his mind and changing the perspective very quickly without any reference to what was said earlier. Yes, we all looked at this, oh, the war is winding down. Okay, good. Things are quieting, maybe there is an off-ramp somehow, maybe there are secret negotiations with we don't know any of that. But now it says, oh, if the Iranians don't open the Strait of Hormuz, then we're going to unleash hell and what have you. I'm not sure, because, again, it's not quite clear to me what the tools are to do this. Iran is 4 times almost the size of Iraq. And we know how difficult that nut was to crack. And even when Americans supposedly won the war against Saddam Hussein and he was taken prisoner, et cetera, there was an occupation force of 150,000 Americans for several years. It didn't go well. We know that, too. But if you try to say, OK, well, if these are the metrics, what's going to be in Iran? That means having more than 500,000 Americans. If you want to take over Iran, if you want unconditional surrender from the Ayatollahs or whoever is in charge now in Tehran today. So it's not quite clear to me what the tools are to compel the Iranian leadership to give in and to say, OK, we're done. We know Strait of Hormuz is open. Everything is fine. You can go, come, et cetera. It's not a bad objective, of course. Yeah. We know 20% of the oil, then we've got the gas, the fertilizers. We know all that stuff. But the tools are not clear to me. We've been bombing Iran now for several weeks, successfully, I would say, but not to the point of forcing the Iranians into submission.
Can we talk about those tools in the toolbox? Because I would imagine that it would become quite evident quite quickly if there were 500,000 foot soldiers on the way.
Yes, and they're not there.
And they are not there, and they cannot magically be shipped there overnight. So what other tools are there? My knowledge of warfare is close to zero, so please, if you could help us understand.
Well, of course.
What else would be going on behind the scenes here?
Well, we know America has control of the skies over Iran. That was accomplished jointly with the Israelis, in fairness. They essentially destroyed all the air defenses. So they can use bombers, precision bombs, whatever, but to hit what exactly? They said that the first few days of war, they hit, 8,000 targets? How many more targets are there that are high value and that would really tilt the balance of this conflict in favor of America? It's not clear to me. I'm sure the Pentagon has its war plans and what have you, but so we know we have the same heavy, let's call them, penetration bombs that were used, remember, last year against the nuclear facilities.
But all of this is still from the sky, is it not?
That's right.
This is a long way from winning a war.
Absolutely. And also, some things that people keep forgetting is that a war ends not when somebody says, I won, but when somebody says, I lost.
Yeah.
Until that moment comes, the war is not over. You have to have somebody who says, OK, enough, I had it. Please, let's stop this. I don't see the current Iranian leadership, as bad as they are, as being easy on this and to say, you know what, we had it good for 47 years, and now it's time to let go because the Americans are really too strong. They're not going to do that.
You don't think this tweet will prompt that sort of action?
I doubt it. Again, I wish look, everybody agrees that the Iranian leadership is a bad lot. Okay, but that doesn't mean that if there was a goal to eliminate the leadership, which seemed to be the Israeli goal from the beginning. They said it at the beginning. That's why they targeted the leaders, right, the people. And they thought, and maybe Mr. Trump, but this is my own guess, said, OK, this is going to be like Venezuela. We go in, extract the top leader, everything falls into place, piece of cake. Well, not exactly. In Iran, they killed I don't know how many top leaders. And if you kill number one, number two steps in. If you kill number three, and on and on. The structure of power in Iran, I wouldn't say it's intact, but it's still functioning. It's viable.
It's still certainly enough to project the image that it's in charge
as well. And I'm not sure that right now, without a massive land invasion, which would mean conquering a country which is 4 times the size of Iraq with 92 million people. How do you do that? I'm not saying it's impossible, but not...
And not just practically. How do you do that and sell it to the public where you are coming up to midterm elections or where you are asking your allies to get involved?
Totally. And also, let's keep in mind that America has essentially zero tolerance for war casualties right now. We had, what, 15, 16 people dead, and it looks like the end of the world. I'm not saying that I...
No, each of those lives was very important,
exactly.
and of course, their families.
Disrespect any of the fallen people who are in the line of duty and get killed, in action due to certainly not fault of their own. But if that's the level of tolerance, and we're talking about a land invasion, which would mean, for sure, more casualties.
It would.
In the light of the midterm elections, with part of the MAGA movement that says this is horrible, this is not what we wanted. You, Mr. President, promised no more forever wars. You said enough with the Middle East. We're not interested in regime change. And then things have been kind of reshuffled in a way that is different. I'm not quite sure. At the moment, opinion polls would indicate that the base is still with him. Tucker Carlson is not with him. Fuentes is not with him.
I don't think those are new developments, perhaps, Paulo.
Exactly, but it seems for the moment he can hold on to this. But remember that the elections are won in the middle, and the independents, who will probably tilt the balance when it comes especially to the election in the House of Representatives, and perhaps the Senate as well, are against this massively.
And they're politically engaged. They remember the comments from, I will not go into war, I do not start wars, and the like. Cut me dry if I'm completely wrong on this, and I may sound quite naive asking you, but I want to clarify. Is there any kind of backdoor diplomacy going on at this point?
Look, we know Oman had offered its good offices previously, and I would think that they're still engaged in some fashion. I would be surprised if they're not, because they have good relations, or at least decent relations with the Iranians. So is there some kind of a backdoor possibility? Of course, we don't know that, because by definition, if these negotiations are going on, they are secret. But I see,
and perhaps not very successful thus far.
So far. Well, exactly. So we have to see how this is going to be played out. I think that Mr. Trump can come up, as he said in his Truth Social, we won, we're done, we destroyed everything, it's time to go home. The Strait of Hormuz, not our problem. Thank you very much. China, go open, it's your oil, right? You go open the Strait of Hormuz. Japan, be my guest. Korea, be my guest. Europe, goodbye. We don't need the oil from the Strait of Hormuz, which is technically true. America is not getting oil from that venue anymore. Completely different story when we had the oil embargo in 73, 74, or 79 after the fall of the Shah. I wouldn't be surprised. But again, I'm not making any predictions. I think that it is really difficult for the president to say, okay, now we go all in, and we are going to go after the regime, and we go back to what he said just a few days ago, unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender means we take over the entire country because everybody laid down their arms, and I wouldn't count on that, because even if there are some people in Tehran, and there may be dissident factions among the Ayatollahs in the Islamic Guard who say, maybe this is too heavy, let's find a way to agree or something, and I'm willing to negotiate. But what if the others are not willing to negotiate? And they say, okay, you are a traitor, we'll kill you, or try to kill you. And we go in the mountains and resist forever. Who knows?
That's where we sit at the moment, isn't it? Who knows? Paulo, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Paulo von Schirach, President at the Global Policy Institute.